Well, morning everyone. So if you're watching on video, this is our lesson for Greek 1A for the week, 25th of May. And Estelle mentioned to me that there are some folks struggling to understand how the verb to be functions. So I thought I would talk about that for a little bit, and then we can go and pick up a few examples of it just now. Essentially, I guess we can stop the screen share. I'm not speaking from that. But essentially we get two kinds of verbs. We get verbs that describe an action. So anything that's depicting an action is one category of verb, and you get verbs that represent a state of being. They're a different category. So where there's an action, you're going to have typically a subject, and normally the subject will be doing the action, sometimes receiving the action. And then for those verbs, sometimes a thing to which the action is being done, which would be the direct object. For verbs that represent a state of being, you're not representing something happening, you're simply saying something is a certain thing. And the verb to be, in all its forms, is, are, etc., in Greek, emi, estin, etc., is a state of verb. It's by far the most common state of verb. So what it basically does, it doesn't represent an action, it represents a state. When verbs represent a state, they cannot take a direct object because there's no action. Action has to happen to an object. So if you have a verb that's describing a state of being, there can't be something to which the state is being done. You're simply saying a particular thing that exists is continuing to exist in that state. So verbs that describe a state of being will take, instead of a direct object, they may take a predicate, but it's a predicate nominative in Greek. In other words, it's saying one thing is something else, where the predicate is in some sense defining the state. It'll be not in the accusative case, but in the nominative case. So simple way to go and check this is just to pick out a few examples. So I am going to do a search quickly. Let me just share my screen again. Any theory questions around that? I suspect the folk that are in the live meeting have this figured out.
Yeah, for me that's kind of obvious. I've never struggled with that.
All right, so I'm going to go back into Logos. Let's, for the sake of convenience, book. Let's pick John. All right, and now let's. So essentially, what I'm going to do, John has got a few of these at the beginning. It's got ein, which is a past tense form of estin. So we've got the word hologos was something, and the something in this case is a prepositional phrase, in arche. How many of these do we have? All right, let's do this in Bible Arc. I think we can diagram this effectively. Just let me get there. Okay, change of plan. Be right along, folks. Just going to put that up. Demonstrated this tool before, and I see some of you have started to use it. It's quite useful. Link that to John 1. All right, so so what we're going to look for is state of verbs. So there's one, ein, he was. There's another one. These are past tense forms, as I mentioned, of estin.
Sorry, Kevin, can you just share your screen?
Evan, sorry. Okay, so we want to share this. There we go. Trust you can see that. Hope you can see it. Right, so, yes.
No, I just said that yes, I just said that I could see it.
Oh, okay. All right, fantastic. So here we've got enarche in the beginning. Ein was hologos, the word ke, and hologos, ein, the word was, proston theon, with God, literally the God, but that's not very good English. Kai, theos, ein, hologos, and God was the word. Hutos, there's another one, ein, enarche, proston theon, panta, all things, diautu, through him. Egeneto is also a stative verb. It'll take a predicate nominative, but we won't worry about that now. Kai chorisautu, and without him or apart from him, egeneto, it was made, ude hen, not even one thing. So we've got a few past tense expressions of estin here. And if we were to illustrate them in our first one, I want to take these out. So if we take our first clause, enarche en hologos, hologos would be our subject. Let's get a diagram like this. Now, usually we would be saying the word was, and we would have an attribute of some sort that would follow that. Okay, so I just want to move that a bit long. So usually over here we would have some kind of an attribute that would follow that, which could be a noun, in which case it would be a predicate nominative. But what we're going to have, because this isn't an action, it's just simply a state of being that's continuing to exist. In other words, in this case, in the past tense, what we put is a predicate nominative marker typically, and we would put the predicate there. In this case, however, come on, there we go. We don't have a predicate nominative, we have a prepositional phrase. Prepositional phrases modify verbs typically, and this one would go here. So we have the word was, it was continuing to exist in the past tense, enarche, in the beginning, i.e. when the beginning came along. So just like a normal verb can have a prepositional phrase to complete its thoughts, so we can have with stative verbs as well as active verbs. We can have the same with our next one, hologos ein. So if we do it again, don't really need to elaborate too much. The word was in the beginning. The word was pros ton theon. The word was with God. So that's our second sentence. Same logic. The word was, it was continuing to exist in a certain state. That's the present idea, and this is past tense. So at a point in the past, which has already been defined in our sentence as enarche, in the beginning. So the word was with God. Kai, third sentence, theos en hologos. Hologos is again the subject. So if we were diagramming it, we're going to have three parallel. Okay, well, it'll simplify my look and come on, simplify my look and feel if I have some obsessive compulsive tendencies. I apologize. So let's just put that out again. All right, so now this is our first one that has a predicate. So it's the word was, and the predicate is theos. Now theos is a noun. We diagram it like this. Normally we would have a vertical line here to separate the direct object. This particular model of diagramming uses the slanted line to show that it's a predicate nominative. So the noun in the nominative case is not the direct object of the verb, because to be a direct object, some action has to be performed on the object. I carry the book, I run the race, etc. So the action is in some sense being applied to the direct object. But since stative verbs do not perform action, the subject would, the predicate, which will be in the nominative case, is simply a predicate and not an object. In this case, as in many, there are some rules for distinguishing what is the subject and what is the object. What is the predicate nominative. So if we go into our original sentence, Theos ein ho logos, it reads, God was the Word. But one of the rules is that the nominative noun that has the subject, that has the article will be the subject, and the noun without the article in such a construction will be the predicate. So in this case, hologos is once again the subject and theos is the predicate. It's put in front of the verb ein, and if we get a little bit more advanced, you will learn that that tends to emphasize the qualitative nature of the predicate. So what this is saying in effect is that the word was theos, meaning not the word was the same person as theos, we've already said he was separate over here, but rather the word was in all respects the same as theos. He was qualitatively God. Alright, so that is a good example of a predicate nominative where the complement of the stative verb is expressed in the nominative case. Yebo.
If us were articulate as well, how would you then know which one is a predicate and which one is the subject?
If theos also had the article?
Yes.
You would, then you would revert to word order as you would in English. So if we had two nouns with the article, then the one that comes first in order will be treated as the subject. Problema. Here's another one.
Kevin, the archein in your first diagram, does that belong there or does it belong as part of the prepositional phrase?
Oh, sorry, I messed that up. Sorry. Yeah, no, I thought I'd put it. I thought I had attached it to the prepositional phrase. No, of course it's part of the prepositional phrase.
Sorry, Kevin, just one more question. In last week's meeting, you mentioned the entire phrase would be the predicate nominative. Is that the case in every case, or how would they know that it's the case or not?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what goes with the predicate nominative.
In last week's meeting, the example that you used, you said that the entire prepositional phrase serves as the predicate nominative. So is that the case in every clause where there's a verb to be and then a prepositional phrase?
No, a prepositional phrase isn't a predicate nominative. A prepositional phrase is a prepositional phrase, but a prepositional phrase, like in these two senses, is completing the idea of ein. So the word was, what state is going to complete that thought? Well, proston theon is being used to complete the sentence, to complete the thought, and thus is functioning to complete the idea of the verb. So it's functioning a little bit like a predicate. I wouldn't have intended to say it is a predicate, but it is completing the thought of the verb.
Sorry, my reading was wrong. You did say it functions as a predicate. I should have said that.
All right, so a predicate nominative will be a noun in the nominative case. Sometimes this would be an adjective, in which case it's called a predicate adjective. And if it's a prepositional phrase, we would understand it's a prepositional phrase modifying the verb, but in practice it's completing the thought. So I can use a noun to complete the thought, the word was God, or I can use a prepositional phrase to complete the thought, the word was in the beginning. So in each case, I'm making a statement about the state in which the word was existing. But grammatically, we would treat these as different things. We can see that they're somewhat parallel, though.
So Kevin, it would be a bit like the relative clause fulfilling the function of a noun in some sentences.
Yes, a little bit like that. Okay. Let's do another one. Yeah, we've got one down in verse 8. Uk ein ekenos, that one. Ekenos means that one. You may not have learned it yet. It's often used in a manner similar to a personal pronoun. It's actually a demonstrative pronoun. Tophos, the light. Tophos means the light. So this is John, and it's saying Uk ein ekenos tophos. I'm going to ignore the ein and just going to diagram it as if it's saying he was the light. So ekenos ein tophos. So we've got he, that one, pointing in the context back to John the Baptist. So he was, and we would have had a negative here. Oh well, let's put it in. Where are you, Jono? So he was not tophos, the light. So he was not existing in the state of being the light. In this case, we have a personal pronoun or a pronoun and a noun that has the article. In this kind of case, the pronoun is the subject and the noun is the predicate nominative. And again, we can see it's in the state of being the light that he was continuing to exist. Any questions? Is this?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. There's a dependent clause just after that. Can you just diagram that? Because I always get confused about how to diagram those.
Give me the clause.
The one that starts with eine. Eine, they say, always introduces a dependent clause.
What verse are you in?
Just straight after verse 8, straight after where you are.
Yeah, alhina.
Yeah.
Alhina martyrese peritu photos. All right. So it's he was not the light. That's what we got here. Uk ein ekinos or ekenos. I'm in the habit of reading this in a slightly different pronunciation most of the time. So forgive me if I slip, chop, and change. So uk ein ekenos tophos. Al, but hina martyrese. In order that hina is usually a marker of purpose. Martyrese, that he might testify peritu photos, concerning the light. So what we have here is something missing from this clause. We've got ellipsis, would be my guess, and if I look back, I'm going to look for a word that says he came, and there it is. So hutos, this one, Elphin came, eis marturian, as a witness or for a witness, hina martyrese peritu photos. So here we've got the exact same phrase. Notice, hina martyrese, in order that he might bear witness, peritu photos, concerning the light. Can you see what I'm pointing at? Hope you can.
Yep, we can.
You might need to hide our pictures. And here, in verse 8, you've got exactly the same phrase repeated with the hina. Hina martyrese peritu photos in 7, and in 8, hina martyrese peritu photos, in order that he might bear witness to the light. So what we've got going on in verse 7 is he came as a witness in order to bear witness to the light, and he repeats the second half of that in order to bear witness concerning the light in the second part of verse 8. And what he's not done is repeat to the word he came. Right, so we need to supply that from the context. Now you would do that fairly intuitively if this was fluent for you and you had just read verse 7. So, but I'm going to carry on diagramming this sentence. So he was not the light, ekenos ein tophos, uk, he was not the light, but al. All right, now we need a new sentence, which is going to be supplied. I'm going to borrow it from verse 7 and I'm going to supply it because it needs to be there even though it's not there. Okay, so it's but. The subject is unexpressed because it's embedded in the verb. But he came, and then hina normally introduces a purpose clause, and that's exactly what it does here. He came, marturese, in order to bear witness. Don't worry about trying to understand how that works for now. All right, but it is a subordinate clause in this case. No, come on, I want you there, thank you. In order to bear witness, and then peri, to photos, is of course a prepositional phrase, so we're going to say peri. It's modifying this verb, this is a verb. And peri with the genitive means concerning, so he came in order that he might bear witness concerning the light. So that is how I would diagram it, and the difficulty here is that, no, come on. The difficulty here is that Eilthen, meaning he came, had to be supplied from the parallel line at the start of verse 7, and it's been elided, it's fallen away in the duplicate sentence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I just sometimes struggle when you've got more than one thing attached to the same verb to diagram it.
Yeah, what they tend to do, if you had a phrase functioning as a subject, just for the sake of the diagramming, we'll do this because if I had a phrase attached, and let's say that phrase was occupying the subject position, they would diagram it this way. So they'd put it in the subject slot on our baseline, and then they'd put the whole phrase on, I forget what this thing's called now, anyhow, on one of these stilted stands. And you'd put the phrase there within the subject slot to show that it's a phrase, but it's functioning as a subject, or conceivably it could be functioning as an object, in which case you'd put it there. Those things happen quite often.
So you would diagram a relative clause like that?
If the relative clause were functioning as a subject, yeah.
Yeah.
In some cases. Yeah, in some cases, but not always. So relative clauses are a little bit problematic for this mode of diagramming because they tend to belong in more than one place at the same time. Okay, but from the point of view of what's happening with Esteen, any questions? Well, Esteen is ein in the examples we've got here.
Even I just want to ask you if with the picking order where Esteen is concerned, is that where the differences of translations comes in when we look at what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe?
You mean in verse 1?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses have a major problem with verse 1 because it is, they don't know they have a problem, but they do. Most of them don't know. Verse 1 is about as strongly as you can say in Greek that the Word was in all qualitative respects fully God. So what we have here, theos, ein hologos, when you put the predicate noun in front of the verb ein, the stative verb ein or estin, you accentuate the qualitative nature of this noun. And that's exactly what it's doing. Now, the JWs try to claim that because Greek doesn't have an indefinite article, an a or an in English, that we can understand any anarthrous noun, any noun that doesn't have the article, either as qualitative, the word was God, or as indefinite, the word was a God. They would have a better case if the author had stuck to normal word order and said, as we would have it here, ho logos en theos. If that were the word order, then there's at least some case for arguing that you might interpret this as simply an indefinite, but the word order here argues against that. But we're nowhere near that. That's far beyond where we're at the moment. Okay, let's go to one or two famous ones, other famous ones. I'm just going to jump ahead to 1 John 4 verse 8, I think it is. Alright, so here's another famous one. Ho theos agape estin. So the subject, ho theos, estin is our verb. So God is, ho theos estin. And this is a proper predicate nominative. It's a noun completing the thought. God is love. Again, agape is pre-verbal. It's in front of the verb. It accentuates the quality of the predicate nominative. So God is qualitatively love. God is love, etc. So there's some stress on this by putting it in front of the verb. By the way, in Greek you could leave out this. You could leave out estin and simply say ho theos agape, and we would understand that's a predicate function, and we would pretty much get it. But estin simplifies it when there's a noun present. And I think we have another one of these in the near vicinity. Yeah, I think verse 16 has the exact same phrase, but that's not helpful, doesn't it? Nope. Okay, let's check out verse 15 of the same. Do one more, and then we'll move on to any questions. Okay, so here's verse 15, where we have hos eon, whoever, homologese, whoever confesses, hoti, that, Jesus, Jesus, estin, hoios tou theou, the Son of God, ho theos, God, en auto, in him, mene, he remains, kai autos, and he, and we must infer remains applies again, remains ento theo, in God. So here is, within the speech, here is an occurrence of estin, and the subject would be, not ho theos, the subject will be Jesus. So Jesus is, there's a reason this is a variation. Jesus is, our predicate nominative is ho theos, or hios, sorry, and tou theou is a genitive modifying hios. So Jesus is, what state does Jesus exist in? The state of being hoios tou theou, the Son of God. I told you earlier that if you have a pronoun and a noun, the pronoun is the subject and the noun is the predicate. If you have a personal name and another noun, the person is the subject and the other noun that is not personal is the predicate nominative. So Jesus is the subject and hoios tou theou is the predicate nominative. That would be true even if we chopped the word order around. If I put Jesus after estin, the fact that the person is the subject is such a strong marker that a person or a personal pronoun will fill that subject spot almost regardless of where it appears in the sentence. When there are no persons mentioned, the noun with the article, as in this instance, will be the subject, and the one without the article, the predicate. Okay, any questions about this? We've labored it at length, hopefully helpful to those that are watching and perhaps struggling with the concept of a stative verb. To recap, because there's no action, a state of verb indicates a continuing state of being without implying action. You can't have a direct object, hence not an accusative, and therefore what we have is a predicate expressed in the nominative case, just implying that one thing is remaining as another. All right, questions, comments, other things you would like to discuss this morning? Craig, shoot.
Sorry, can I just ask, if you leave Estienne out, then the two subjects almost look as if they're in apposition to each other rather than the one's a predicate nominative of the other. How can you tell the difference between those?
Yeah, you catch me out, Craig. You can leave it out when the predicate is an adjective. You can't leave it out as comfortably when the predicate is a noun. Let me think about that. I don't think it does leave it out when the predicate is a noun. Hebrew does that all the time, but I don't think Greek does. I'll have to think about that. You would, in the hypothetical case that Estienne were elided, you'd use the same rules. You would assume that the one that would have, you would have inferred that it were present, and you'd use the same guidelines. But I think I'm confusing adjectives and nouns. So you frequently leave it out when the predicate is an adjective, but you don't really leave it out when the predicate is a noun. That's off the cuff. I would need to think whether there are exceptions. Hello?
Hello, yeah, sorry, I didn't unmute my mic. Yeah, that's fine. As I say, I just sometimes struggle with the whole concept of apposition compared to a predicate nominative, and the way I've told the difference is the verb being there or not. But what you say makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if we simply change this to read hotheos, so I'll type a sentence here. Okay, so if we simply change this to say, I'll use words you know, hotheos, Estienne, agathos. You can read that, right? Hotheos, Estienne, agathos. God is good. In this case, agathos is an adjective, not a noun. And if I were to take out Estienne, we would still have God is good. So the adjective stands in a predicate relationship to the noun. And I could move it around. I mean, I could put it here. Agathos, hotheos doesn't make any difference. It still stands in a predicate relationship to the noun. How do we know which one's the subject? Well, two ways. This is a noun, and this is an adjective. And the noun has the article. Not always, but usually. So there are two diagnostics that would tell me this is not my subject, this is my subject in this little phrase. The moment I make this agape, I change its word category to a noun instead of a verb, and now that is less natural to say hotheos agape. It's not so natural to Greek, it's very natural to Hebrew. I would have to think and keep an eye out for this when reading, but I think when it's this, we're going to find Estienne expressed. So we're going to find this. All right, that didn't work, but anyway, I think you heard me. All right, any other questions you'd like to talk about? Happy to pick up exercise questions that you've been struggling with or that have been posing a headache. Estelle, anything else you've picked up in marking that's been a recurring blind spot?
No, Kevin, it was only the verb to be that was really a blind spot for most, but nothing else. They are doing very well at the moment.
Polikala, Eucharisto.
Maybe something that you can just go over again, Kevin, for some of the students is how to recognize the subject and how to recognize the object. Please.
All right, so if we've got a stative verb, some form of estin, how do we know what's the subject and what's the object? So number one, a personal noun is the subject. Number two, a personal pronoun is the subject. If they are neither of those, then the noun with the article is the subject. So, and if none of those apply, then word order. So first noun is subject. Right, so if we take the examples we got, the person is the subject. We got an example of it over here. Jesus, Jesus, estin hoios tu theou. Even though this one has the article, articular noun is the subject, it's trumped because a person is the subject ahead of an articular non-person. So, Jesus estin hoios, the person is the subject. That's number one. All right. These two really are the same thing because a person is represented by a personal pronoun. But a personal pronoun is the second one to look for. So here's an example up here. Ekenos, that's a demonstrative pronoun, but it's pointing to a person. So he, that one. Eintofos, that one was the light or was not the light. So we've got a noun with the article and a pronoun which is pointing to a person. It's not technically a personal pronoun in this example, but it's pointing to a person, so it's functioning that way. So the personal pronoun is the subject, and whatever is left becomes the predicate. The articular noun is the subject. We got a great example of that in John 1, verse 1, which said, Theos ein hologos, even though the word order put theos first, the order is that it's the noun with the article, hologos, that will be the subject, and the noun without the article, in this case theos, becomes the predicate. And if none of those applied, I don't think we had an example where none of those applied, but if none of them did apply, then whichever one appeared first of the two would be considered the subject and the other one the predicate. So those are our pecking order, more or less. Okay. I want to point out a couple of resources that we're quite excited about while we've got a gap. So I'm going to do that for the benefit of those that have taken the time to come in the flesh and anyone who has lasted this long on the recording. So what I want to do is SATS has just subscribed to a very nifty collection of ebooks, and there are some good Greek ones among them. So if you log into your MySats, presumably it looks something like this when you get in. Trust you can see a MySats home screen. We still got to change the wording because this is hot off the press, but if you look at My Research Tools and you click on Online Journals, this used to be only journals, but we've expanded it now. You'll open a screen that looks like this. And this has a couple of platforms. JSTOR is a goldmine, by the way, but the other one that's goldmine is EBSCOhost. So what I want to point out to you this morning is EBSCOhost. So you go My Research Tools, Online Journals, EBSCOhost, and you click there. The password is SATS, and the login is Seminary. Once you log in, you get access to all of our journal subscriptions. So these are all journal subscriptions. But we've just added all this at the bottom, which is ebook collections. Can you guys see this? Trust you can see it. All right, so one of them is an ebook religion collection from EBSCOhost, and the other one is an ebook academic collection, also from EBSCOhost. These trials will disappear. They were trials for the same thing, but the subscription parts will remain. So I'm going to take, for instance, ebook religion collection and log in. This could be useful for all courses. So I've now just chosen one of the collections, the ebook religion collection. I'll go to an advanced search and I'll search for Greek language. Change that to subject area. You could search for something in the title, but let's just do Greek language as a subject. And when I click on that, I'm going to get a few hits. Two of them I want to point out to you that are potentially useful. The first one, a beginning intermediate grammar of Hellenistic Greek. This is by Robert Funk. Robert Funk is not a chap we would generally recommend if it was a theology course, but on Greek grammar he is one of the leading authorities, and this is a fairly new edition of his intermediate grammar. It's a substantial piece of work, about just under 600 pages if memory serves, and you are able to read this whole book online from EBSCOhost. So if I click on that, it'll actually open that. So that's one. And there was another one that looked pretty useful. Just let me scroll down.
This is awesome.
This is pretty useful as well. Understanding Language, a guide for beginning students of Greek and Latin. This is an explanation of grammatical, how things work in terms of grammar. So for instance, they'll have a section on verbs and they'll begin by explaining the features of verbs, active and subject. So the explanation is based on grammatical categories, but often those are foundational to understanding language. This is not a long book. I think it's about 150 pages. And again, is pretty useful. So I'm going to open that one. Let's go back into Funk. So Funk's book has 62 lessons and a whole bunch of appendices. He is very highly regarded as a Greek grammarian. So let's just take a random, I haven't read this, but let's randomly pick lesson 30. In fact, I had a quick squiz last night at lesson 10, which was third declension. So if we go into this, we will have a discussion of third declension nouns, and it is in a fair amount more detail on some of the technical points than you're going to get in Mounce's beginning grammar. Okay, so I think he has about 4 chapters on the third declension, for instance. So nifty resource to have available, and I commend it to you not only for the Greek courses but also for others. If I go back into this, sorry, okay, so it wants me to open that, not the main link. Okay, so this one, again, there's our whatnot. So if I go into what do verbs do, is chapter 6, and I browse through, I think you're going to find kinds of verbs, and Yari's going to compare stative verbs with transitive, active verbs, etc. So this is all explaining the grammatical categories that are the sort of bedrock or foundation on which grammar is built and understood. So 2 useful resources in that collection, but I'm sure if you browse around for other courses, you're going to find a lot of other useful resources. We are still figuring it out. There is a way to check these out, but I haven't figured out what it is yet. We've only had this for a few days. But there are ways, apparently, that you can download these books onto your tablet or your computer, and it works like an electronic library. You can have them for a period of time, and then they'll get automatically checked back in. I think we still have to set that time period. It's probably going to be something like a month. So, nice addition to the SAT suite. We're quite excited about it, and there's quite a lot here. So in total, there are 177,000 ebooks at the moment, of which probably 10,000 are religion and theology books. Questions?
Sorry, Kevin, is there a downloadable version of the AlexX on the internet anywhere? Because quite often these questions go back, and these things go back to the Old Testament, but the current version that I've got only does the New Testament.
My best guess is that there would be a number. So programs like the Word, I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, I've got the Word, but it only has New Testament versions.
Doesn't have an LXX?
No, Bible Arc does, but the problem is that you have to log on, and quite often I'm not logged on. So,
well, my guess would be to check things like the Word and eSword, but I don't use them very often, so I don't actually know what's there as far as full range of resources. Does not YouVersion have an LXX amongst its suite of offerings?
I haven't.
Craig, you can probably look as well as I can.
Yeah,
my assumption would have been to check those sites. So for apps, the ones I consider to be best are the Word, YouVersion, and eSword. So check the free apps. SPL have it.
I was just wondering whether there was one like Lexham or one of those that actually has the Old Testament in a similar format to the way they do the New Testament, because I found the Lexham thing really useful because it has all the Strong's numbers and the passing information and all that stuff, so it's easy when you look up a verse to see how they put the sentence together.
Yeah, no, I understand. You're going to find fewer tools readily available for the Septuagint than you will for the Greek New Testament, because to some extent the Greek New Testament's a primary text and the Septuagint is a secondary text, so it tends to get priority. No, Craig, I don't know offhand. I think that there's likely to be a copy in programs like eSword and YouVersion, but you would need to check to verify that. All right, a last thing I'll mention today. This is actually developed by a guy I know, but it's a pretty useful tool. It's just gone free. Just give me a sec. Scripture Direct, and it's available for Android and for Apple devices. And when you open it up, it's going to look pretty much like this. So essentially what you get is an interlinear Greek New Testament. It will have each line, a line of Greek and a line of English underneath it in a typical interlinear form. And on your phone or your tablet, if you were to tap on one of the words, it would highlight the corresponding word in the interlinear text. And if you tap a second time, it'll open up passing information and a direct link to the Louw-Nida lexicon with its definition. Louw-Nida is highly regarded, probably the number 2 choice after BDAG in most scholars' perceptions. So it gives you a free copy of Louw-Nida tagged into the Greek text and works. I haven't checked if there's a computer version. It's not the sort of thing I would tend to use on a computer, but it's very, very nifty. So yeah, we get a few screenshots, and I've just realized I'm not showing you my screen. Sorry about that. Let me share it quickly. Okay, so what I was trying to do is show you this. So it's called scripturedirect.com, and if you go into your app store in your Android or Apple, I think you just search for Scripture Direct and you should find it. So essentially what you get is a line of Greek and a line of English, which is the interlinear. I'll show you a few more screenshots. So if I wanted to check, he's illustrated the word cosmos. Cosmon is world. So if you tap on either the English or the Greek, it'll highlight the corresponding word in the other language. If I tap on it again, it'll give me passing information for that word and the definitions in the Lohn-Nida Greek English lexicon, which, as I said, is still highly regarded. And then you can look up the definitions under the various entries. So very simple, user-friendly app. Not too big. It's a one purpose. It's an interlinear with a dictionary and passing information. To me, it looks like a fantastic addition for practicing reading. It's the sort of thing you want to take with you to church, or if you're trying to improve reading speed. The biggest problem is the lack of vocabulary. So it gives vocab in an interlinear tagged form, and if you need a little bit more, you can open a good lexicon and check passing information on the fly. So scripturedirect.com, it's not Septuagint, unfortunately, Craig, but it is useful for New Testament. So I've downloaded this, and I think it's a nifty quick access tool. Commend it to you. Okay. I think we're going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. If there are no more questions, last chance, final comments or questions? Is that a comment, Colin?
Yeah, I was just saying thanks.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Pleasure. Bless you guys. Have a wonderful week.
Okay.
See you same time next week.
Kevin, may I just have a quick word with you after class?
Yeah, sure. Let's ask Colin and Craig just to leave, and we'll stay behind. Thanks, guys. Bye.